The invitation was tucked inside the pages of a novel he hadn't finished, her way of being romantic. Or at least, he hoped that was her intention. It was a folded cream card, handwritten with her signature loopy script, "Just you and me this time. No excuses. Saturday at 7. Love, M." Daniel reread the message at least 5 times, holding it under the kitchen light like it might vanish if he blinked. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because it had been so long since she'd written anything with the word love. Marissa used to leave notes all the time, tucked in his lunchbox, on the bathroom mirror, scribbled onto receipts or napkins. And now, here it was again, a sliver of something familiar, something hopeful. He stood in front of the mirror that afternoon, razor in hand, staring at his reflection. The grays had crept in slowly, like mold in the corners of a forgotten room. But he shaved carefully, pressed his best linen shirt, picked the cologne she once said smelled like Maui on their honeymoon. He even stopped by the wine shop on Beretania Street to grab the bottle she used to love, the one with the pineapple on the label. It wasn't expensive, but it was theirs, or had been. By the time he arrived at the Luau, the sun had slipped below the horizon, and the garden was alive with golden lanterns and swaying torches. Music floated through the palms, the soft strumming of a ukulele. Laughter, the gentle clink of glasses. The scent of roasted pork and plumeria hung thick in the air. Daniel took a deep breath. He stepped onto the path lined with flower petals, smiling at the soft warmth of the evening. He passed under a bamboo arch where couples took selfies. A hostess in a grass skirt handed him a lei. He took it with a shy nod, still clutching the wine bottle like a gift he wasn't sure would be received. He scanned the crowd. The tiki lights flickered across tan shoulders. Flower crowns, swaying skirts. But then, there she was. Marissa, his wife, his girl, the woman who once kissed him in a rainstorm on a dare. She stood under a string of fairy lights, her back arched in laughter. Her dress was red, floral, cinched at the waist. Her hair fell in glossy waves. But she wasn't alone. Daniel stopped walking. A man was standing beside her, taller than Daniel, maybe 30 at most, lean and fit in a floral button-down left open at the top. His arm was around Marissa's waist. Marissa didn't move, didn't push him away. Instead, she leaned in, her head tipped onto the man's shoulder like it belonged there. Daniel's smile died in his throat. He took a step back, unsure if he'd misread. Maybe it was a friend, maybe a cousin, maybe. Then Marissa turned slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she smiled, a different smile, not cruel, not cold, just detached, like she had already rehearsed this moment in her mind. Daniel's heart stuttered. He looked down at the wine in his hand, then back at her. Marissa said something to the man, who nodded and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek before walking toward the buffet. She approached Daniel slowly, her heels clicking softly on the stone path. "You came," she said. He stared at her. "You invited me." She glanced at the bottle. "Is that the pineapple wine?" "Yeah," he said, his voice cracked. "I thought it was your favorite." Marissa smiled again. It was. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Just the music and the ocean waves crashing in the distance. Daniel finally asked, "Who was that?" Marissa's gaze drifted back to the man now chatting animatedly with guests near the fire pit. "His name is Luca. He's someone I work with." Daniel swallowed. "Someone you're seeing?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with those eyes that once knew him so well. "I didn't invite you to hurt you," she said. I thought it was time you knew. Really knew." Daniel took a shaky breath. The wine bottle now felt like a dumb joke. A prop in the wrong play. "So this isn't for us," he said, "this whole night." Marissa looked down, then back at him. "No, Daniel, it's not." And just like that, the illusion shattered. The music didn't sound romantic anymore, it was just noise. The lights too bright, the smiles too forced. He felt naked. Guests walked past him, laughing, sipping drinks, brushing flower petals from their shoulders. None of them knew that a marriage was dying right there in the middle of paradise. He turned to leave, but Marissa touched his arm. "You deserve someone who sees you," she said. Daniel looked at her one last time. The woman he thought he'd grow old with. The woman who now looked like a stranger in a dress meant for someone else. He walked away, the bottle of wine still in his hand. Behind him, the laughter grew louder. He never noticed how cold the wind had gotten until he was already in his car, staring through the windshield at nothing. And in the rearview mirror, the glow of tiki torches flickered like tiny fires he could never put out. Daniel returned to the party not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know where else to go. He wandered back into the tiki-lit garden like a ghost, the bottle of wine now tucked beneath a table near the bar. He didn't feel drunk, he didn't feel anything. He stood near a palm tree and watched from a distance. Marissa had rejoined Luca, who was now holding her drink and feeding her a bite of roasted pineapple. She laughed with her mouth open, free and unbothered, the same laugh that used to be his favorite sound. Daniel tried to melt into the shadows, sipping from whatever cocktail was handed to him by a passing server. It tasted like sugar and gasoline. Around him, the party swelled, people swaying to music, hugging, kissing, dancing barefoot on the grass. Everyone seemed to fit perfectly, everyone but him. He found a seat at a far table under a dim string of lights. No one sat with him. He didn't mind. He stared at his empty glass, then poured another. A man he didn't know gave him a pitying nod. A woman with painted nails and too much perfume leaned over and asked, "Are you here alone?" Daniel smiled politely. Sort of. From across the lawn, he could feel the eyes. Not many, but enough. Whispers traveled faster than torchlight. Some were probably wondering why the man in the linen shirt looked like he was attending a funeral instead of a luau. Others may have pieced it together, the former couple now standing oceans apart at the same celebration. Marissa didn't acknowledge him again. Not once. She introduced Luca to others, laughing, holding his arm, resting her head on his shoulder. Daniel kept sipping. At one point, Luca gave a small speech near the fire pit, thanking everyone for supporting their team's big travel campaign. Daniel's stomach turned. So this wasn't just a party. It was a professional moment. A platform. A public claim. He stood to clear his head. Walked along the edge of the garden until he reached the darker part of the venue. No more torches. Just stars and the distant crash of waves. That's when he heard them. Marissa and Luca. They were standing near the fence that overlooked the shoreline. Voices low but clear in the open night air. "You handled that well," Luca said. "It had to happen sometime." Marissa replied, "I just thought he'd leave quietly. He looks wrecked. He doesn't understand. He never did." "Not really." Luca laughed. "You sure he won't cause a scene?" A pause. "He won't. That's not who he is. He'll just go home and write about it in a journal or something." "You're cold." "No," Marissa said. "I'm free." Daniel didn't move. His heart was pounding now. But not from pain, something else. Something darker, like hearing your eulogy before you're dead. He turned and walked back into the party. His jaw clenched. He poured another drink, then another. He didn't remember how many. At some point, a limbo contest started near the dance floor. Someone spilled beer on his shoe. A ukulele player switched to a fast island tune and people clapped offbeat. It all blurred. Daniel stared at Marissa and Luca dancing, not even hiding it now. She kissed him fully under the fairy lights. Someone whistled. Someone cheered. Daniel stepped backward, bumping into a table. A plate shattered. People turned to look. He mumbled something and walked toward the restroom. Inside, he gripped the edge of the sink and looked at himself. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His pupils dilated. The man in the mirror looked like a stranger who'd lost something he didn't even know he was holding. The door opened. A young man walked in, glanced at Daniel, then turned away. "You okay, bro?" Daniel didn't answer. He washed his face, splashed cold water on his neck, tried to breathe. Outside, the party raged on. He stepped back into the garden. Music thumped like a heartbeat. Somewhere nearby, Fire dances were performing. Marissa clapped, glowing. Daniel stood in the shadows and watched it all like it was a play. And he was the forgotten extra. Then he saw her lean into Luca again. And he heard her say it, clear, cruel, sweet as poison. "You're the real Luau tonight." Daniel froze. He didn't remember walking, or reaching for the decorative torch stand shaped like an iron candle. But suddenly, it was in his hand. And his steps moved him forward. The music didn't stop, but soon, something else would. The lights dimmed around the garden as the fire dances bowed and retreated into the shadows. Tiki torches flickered lower, and someone lit candles on each of the tables, casting the whole luau in an amber glow. The atmosphere shifted, intimate, romantic, expectant. Daniel sat in a corner beneath a cluster of ferns. Nearly invisible, the candlelight made everything look dreamlike, unreal. He rested his hands in his lap, fingers twitching slightly. Across the lawn, Luca and Marissa stepped into the center of the space where a hula dancer had just performed. Someone began clapping, calling for couples to join the dance floor. A gentle rhythm rose, the strumming of strings, the soft beat of drums. Marissa pulled Luca in, her hips already moving with practiced sway. Daniel watched in silence. The crowd circled around them, laughing, sipping from coconuts, swaying along. Marissa's red dress shimmered with each motion. Her bare feet brushed the grass as she leaned into Luca, cheek to cheek, their hands linked in a way that once belonged to Daniel. He didn't blink. Then, somewhere behind him, someone joked loud enough for half the party to hear, "Looks like we're at a wedding nobody told us about." The crowd laughed. A few guests whistled and clapped louder. Daniel stood. He moved without urgency, his body on autopilot. He passed the bar, his eyes sweeping over the half-empty bottles, the lemon slices drying on the counter. He walked by couples holding each other, by friends taking selfies, by old uncles snoring in beach chairs. No one stopped him. At his table, he reached for the centerpiece, a heavy iron candle stand shaped like a torch. Decorative and unused until now, it was heavier than it looked. He gripped it with both hands, his breath catching in his throat. He turned. Marissa spun under Luca's arm. Her hair lifted with the movement. The music quickened. Daniel walked across the lawn, each step echoing in his head like a heartbeat. He didn't yell, didn't cry. He walked straight into the circle. Just as Marissa turned again, she saw him. Her face fell, but before anyone could speak, before the music could catch up, Daniel swung. The iron candle crashed into Luca's skull with a sickening crunch. A scream pierced the air. Marissa lunged forward, catching Luca as he crumpled. Guests gasped, scattered. Someone dropped a drink. Another began yelling for help. The music stopped mid-note. Daniel stood over them, breathing hard, the iron candle now slick in his hands. Luca twitched once. Blood pooled quickly on the grass. Marissa looked up at him, her face painted in shock and horror. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her hands pressed against Luca's wound, trembling. Daniel didn't move. His eyes were blank, distant, as if the act had not been his, but something that had borrowed his body to be born. The first man to reach them was the bartender. He tackled Daniel to the ground, the iron torch rolling from his hand. Two other guests joined, pinning him down. Daniel didn't resist. He just whispered, barely audible, he was the real Luau. Screams turned to sirens. Someone called 911. Someone else tried CPR. But Luca was already gone. The lights, the laughter, the dancing, all vanished in a single swing. Marissa sat beside the body of the man she chose, rocking slightly, muttering, "No, no, no," as blood seeped into her dress. Police arrived within minutes. They cuffed Daniel, who said nothing. He didn't look at Marissa, didn't look at the body, only at his own hands, shaking, wet, and foreign. One of the guests, filming with his phone, asked loudly, "Why'd you do it, man?" Daniel didn't answer. Later, at the station, under fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, Daniel sat in silence. The detective across from him read off the charges. He nodded once, then again, then said, "You know what breaks a man? Watching himself vanish in front of the person he loves." His mugshot made the local paper the next morning. Bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair, linen shirt stained. The headline read, "Jealous Rage Turns Luau into Murder Scene." Marissa never visited him, never wrote, never called. At trial, she testified calmly, tearfully. She told the jury she never meant to hurt Daniel, that he had seemed fine, quiet, gentle, that she hadn't seen it coming. The prosecutor asked her what Luca meant to her. She said, "He made me feel alive again." Daniel was sentenced to 12 years in prison. As the verdict was read, he turned to look at the spectators. No one met his gaze, except one woman, older, perhaps a stranger, who looked at him not with horror, but with pity. He nodded at her, and was led away. The cell was cold and gray, lit by a narrow slit of morning light that never reached the corners. Daniel sat on the bottom bunk, fingers laced, elbows on knees. He hadn't slept much, he hadn't really eaten. Time moved differently here, less like a clock and more like a tide, surging and pulling and never truly going anywhere. He kept replaying the moment. Not the strike, not the blood, but the second before, the silence, the breath he took, the way Marissa's eyes changed when she saw him. It haunted him, not the act, but the awareness of what it made him become. When the guard called his name, he stood slowly. The handcuffs were a formality. He didn't fight, didn't speak. At the courthouse, cameras flashed, journalists waited. The story had become sensation. Husband snaps at Luau. Lover dead. Wife weeps. Community divided. In the holding room, an officer asked why he did it. Daniel looked down at his wrists. "I don't remember the moment it happened," he said. "I just remember that once I was loved." The trial was short. Evidence was clear. Witnesses consistent. The defense tried to plead temporary insanity, but it didn't stick. Marissa's testimony sealed it. She took the stand, her face pale and composed. "Yes, we were separated emotionally for a while," she said, "but I never expected that." Reaction. The prosecutor asked if she still loved her husband. Marissa paused. "Daniel died long before that night," she said softly. "People just didn't see it." The courtroom was silent. When the judge read the sentence, 12 years, Daniel only nodded. He turned to look at the gallery. Friends, strangers, reporters. No one held his gaze, except a janitor standing in the back, whose mop stopped mid-swipe. They shared a glance, brief, human. Back in his cell, Daniel began to write, not because he thought anyone would read it, just because he needed to put something back into the world. He wrote about the sound of a candle breaking bone. He wrote about the smell of roasted pineapple and blood. He wrote about the woman who once kissed him in the rain, and the stranger who stood in her place. Years passed. He kept a small journal beneath his mattress. Pages yellowed, edges worn. He taught other inmates how to read. Fixed broken radios. Was quiet, predictable, safe. Marissa remarried 3 years later. To a tech consultant. Destination wedding in Tahiti. Someone mailed Daniel a copy of the announcement. He didn't open it, just stared at the envelope for a long time, then flushed it down the toilet. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, he would still hear the music, the soft strumming of the ukulele, the laughter, the moment before the storm, and he would wonder if there had ever been a version of that night where he simply walked away. He never got an answer. On the day of his release, 12 years to the week, the guard asked if someone was coming to pick him up. Daniel said no. He walked out in the same shirt he wore that night, now faded, loose around the shoulders. He took a bus to the edge of the island, to a place he once loved, a cliff overlooking the water, where he and Marissa used to bring cheap wine and talk about growing old. He sat on the edge until the sun went down. No tears, no speeches, just the sound of waves, always there, always crashing, always pulling pieces of him away. Daniel never returned to the city. No one saw him after that. Some say he started over on another island. Some say he jumped, but the ocean doesn't keep records, only secrets. And this one, it kept. Daniel's story was a tragedy ignited in silence, proof that sometimes the softest men carry the loudest heartbreak. But across the waters of Oahu, on the lush, quiet island of Kauai, another storm was building. Kaana thought her husband was away on business, until she hired a private investigator, and discovered he was sharing a hidden paradise with his ex. What followed wasn't just betrayal. It was fire, death, and a sentence that would never end. Next, witness how love turned to ashes in the case of Kaana from Kauai.